those prisoners had the highest chance of survival, who were oriented toward a meaning in wait for them, as it were, or to be reunited with beloved persons after the liberation in the future.
The search for meaning is what has become frustrated. People, our patients, complain of this feeling of meaninglessness, of emptiness.
Meaning can be found everywhere, in the smallest hut. On the other hand, you find people who are millionaires and billionaires, and they have no meaning. They kill themselves.
Sometimes I'm angry to myself, so angry that for several days I don't talk with myself.
Life is a quest for meaning. No single individual did more to amplify this idea worldwide than my grandfather, Viktor Frankl. Hello, my name is Alexander Vesely, and this is a personal work about my grandfather. I have often wondered, what is it about his life, his work and his presence that makes him so recognized and loved around the world? Was it his extraordinary intellect or his joyful quest for life? Was it the keen insight or the humorous twinkle in his eye? Many books have been written about my grandfather's work, the influence his logotherapy and existential analysis had in the fields of psychology and psychotherapy, and his sufferings through the greatest tragedy of our time, the Holocaust. In his writings, among them his landmark book Man's Search for Meaning, he explained his theories in a simple and uncomplicated way, so that anyone could learn its most important lesson, that regardless of the circumstances, you can always discover meaning in life. Until now, little has been shared with the world about his unique and personal side, and the impact he had on those whose lives he touched. For over 2 years, I traveled around the world, interviewing family, friends, and colleagues to document their perspectives on my grandfather's life. What I found was that from whatever corner of the world, he touched lives in important, deep, and meaningful ways. Born in Vienna, Austria in 1905, in humble surroundings, he remained a simple man throughout his life. And he was curious, looking forward, never stagnating in the past. Come with me on this journey as we watch and listen to his friends describe who Viktor Frankl really was.
I was the only one in a school dressed in a suit and tie that day. I was petrified. I mean, I had read his books and I knew who he was, and I couldn't believe who I was. I was going to be his graduate assistant, and I was nervous as all get out.
I knew that Victor and Ellie were still both living in Vienna at the same place, but had not seen them for a very long time. And I thought, I'll try one time to get back to them because I wanted to say thank you.
But he warned me, he said, I'm a very tight schedule, I'll have 5 minutes for you. All right, I have 5 minutes, fine.
He said, can you come to our home right now? I said, yes, I can do this. So I made my way down and up to their flat.
5 minutes turned out to be 4 hours.
And we were talking and laughing.
And then we taught the first class. I began a 20-year relationship with him.
That was the most lasting impression that to this very day I have of a person who valued his time, but then he spent it so liberally when it was for something that he felt was, if I can use that word, meaningful.
Really, 16% of these students regarded their main goal and concern in life to make a lot of money. I'm quoting literally, make a lot of money. And you know what the top class, the top category, we say category, what do you say? Category was among, you excuse me, but I know I am speaking a marvelous accent without the slightest English. Now,
he had a marvelous sense of humor. And I know that his relationship with my father, which was very special, allowed the two of them to go back and forth on different subjects. And it was almost comical to observe because you wouldn't know if they were serious or if they were just having fun. And then at the end, when they would start laughing, then as you were observing this interaction, you would say, oh, they were just having fun the whole time.
He didn't fit into any conventional sense into anything. How do you explain an individual who, when you sit down with him, he takes a pen and he starts to doodle, and in 5 minutes he's giving you a profile of yourself that's as accurate as it comes, you know?
A genius with the simplest of tastes and preferences. He was almost like a child. He had a worn-out Ziploc bag. It was as worn out and soft as tissue paper, in which he kept his medicines. He liked the Ziploc bag because he could hold it up to the lights and see through it to the bottles that were there. And I had brought a book in a Ziploc bag for someone who wanted his autograph. And I left the book in the Ziploc bag at Victor's apartment to pick up the next day after he had inscribed it. He gave back the book, but not the Ziploc bag. And I said, where's the Ziploc bag? And he said, oh, I'm keeping this. And he liked it because it was a nice, new, clear Ziploc bag, and he refused to give it back to me and had retired this old Ziploc bag. So, of course, when I came back to the States, I bought him a whole box of Ziploc bags and mailed those off to him. But he liked that so much. Again, an example of that simple. He didn't spend money on stuff. He didn't accumulate stuff, and the littlest things would please him and delight him. A Ziploc bag. Come on.
Forgive my contradicting a paragraph in the Declaration of Independence. You cannot pursue pursuit of happiness. You cannot pursue happiness simply because happiness must happen. You must let happiness happen. You cannot strive directly for it. You can only fulfill a meaning or love another person and thereby becoming automatically happy. Happiness and pleasure are byproducts, are side effects, but not the real goal, the actual goal of human strivings.
We're having this wide-ranging discussion, and he's talking with me about his times with Adler and how he was a protege of Adler and then didn't stand up for Adler at a meeting that they had at one of the coffee houses, I believe, and how he was excommunicated, so to speak, from the coffee house culture. So we're having these discussions about, and I turned to Ellie over dinner. I turn to Mrs. Frankel and I say, you know, I'm so sorry. You must have heard these stories many times before. And she says, oh no, some of these stories I'm hearing for the first time. And I realize that we're having this Herculean struggle on the subterranean level. And as we're having dinner, I'm trying to make him feel good about who he is, and he is working to make me feel good about who I am, and I'm good at this, and he has me outclassed. He's just so good at this.
He had been blessed with a gifted mind. His spirit was very rich. He was an intensely humble human being, and he used those gifts to enrich and help humanity.
Papa invented those two characters for us, Boff and Nabov. They were played by his feet under the blanket. When we slept over at our grandparents', and we went to bed in the evening, he was already in his bed, and his feet were Boff and Nabov, and they were talking to each other like comedians, one with a high-pitched voice, high-pitched, and the other one with a very low voice. And one, but I don't remember which one was the wise guy and one was the stupid one. And the wise guy was explained something to the stupid one. It was very funny. And he made up stories and dialogues and things. His humor was dry and sharp and very witty and very fast. And Anna is the same. Anna does that too. I think she inherited that. And also the love of language and writing and putting complex idea in one simple sentence.
There's certainly no one who is spared with unchangeable situations. Perhaps for a couple of months unemployment, and still life retains a meaning. What we need, you see, is not bread alone. And what the unemployed need is not welfare alone. They need a meaning, and a meaning can be found everywhere, in the smallest hut. On the other hand, you find people who are millionaires and billionaires, and they have no meaning. They kill themselves.
I like to remember the way in which he used the questions posed to him by interviewers for his own purposes. And his purposes were always therapeutical. So whatever the interviewer asked, he would shortly answer in half a sentence that question, and then would elaborate and would really address the audience. He would do a kind of collective therapy in a few sentences. He would intersperse his statement with little items that would help someone out there who may have had some fear, some problem, something to encourage them, or to make them change an attitude or whatever. So he talked kind of over the shoulders of the interviewer. You know this kind of thing from politicians where you don't like it because they want something from you. But he was always one to give advice, to give help, to give encouragement. And I sometimes talked to him about it. And he always smiled and talked about other things. But I knew that this was what he had in mind.
When I was a student, second-year student, I think, or first-year student, I guess, one of the things he did, and I found that he did this with a lot of his people who we thought were promising students, is he would bring you up to his office to open the mail with him. And when he opened the mail, you would open the letter, you would read it to him, and then he would say, how would you respond? And then you would discuss the response, and then you would write it up. And when I was there, I would type it up for him, but many times Ellie did it too. And you could see the focus. You could see him thinking beyond the question into the meaning of the question and where was this person going with this question. And when he answered it, he answered not only the question, but the whole intent and the whole final road of where the person was going. And he was very, very serious, and he took such pride in his work, and he didn't want to be misunderstood, and he was so precise in his writing, and yet he had these complex things, as I said, in these very simple ways. And that side of him I don't think a lot of people see, because I would see him struggling at his desk, trying to think, looking down, trying to think, well, how do I want to say this? And especially when he had to do it in English. You know, it's my understanding that English was his third language. He spoke Spanish, and he spoke German and English. And I think maybe his Spanish might have been third, I'm not sure. But it's still a second language. Now, as a typical American, I have no other languages but English. And when I used to see him, he was thinking both in German and in English. But he would concentrate, and he was so focused, it was almost at times like he was in a different place. Okay? And then he would come out of it and start talking. You know? And nobody would say a word. Ellie wouldn't say a word. I wouldn't say a word. You know, sometimes we thought, did he forget the question, you know?
He has an American pilot license, and he was in his 70s when he got it, and that's no simple thing to accomplish. And he loved the flying, and we got Dr. Frankel and put him in a cockpit in the left-hand seat, but his feet wouldn't reach the rudder pedals. We had to shove the capstan all the way forward. He held me in great respect, which I didn't deserve, really, simply because I was a pilot in World War II. But what he went through, is, I wouldn't have traded places with him, so I wasn't a hero, he was a hero. But that's how he saw it. I said to him, you know, Dr. Frankel, I've always been puzzled. I just don't understand. He had been talking a little bit about the war and that kind of stuff. I don't understand how in the world people could do what they do in a wartime. We kill one another and blah, 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 blah. And I said, it just seems to me, my answer all these years have been, it seems to me that man has the capacity to anesthetize his conscience, and therefore that's why he does these weird things. He's anesthetized his conscience. And I believe that until I talked with your grandfather, and he said, oh no, he said, I would never teach that. You cannot anesthetize your conscience. What you can do, and what man is capable of, and what he does do, is he anesthetizes himself against the voice of his conscience, but that conscience is always cooking.
He had a passion about logotherapy not being misunderstood. This is something that I saw in him all the time. Nothing bothered him more than people who would take a statement and out of context or would distort what logotherapy is, and it bothered him because this really was his baby.
Now this means that you have found the meaning to life, the meaning that a person should give to his own existence.
You see, we psychiatrists are not omniscient. We cannot know what the meaning of a particular life is. Mm-hmm. We are out to help our patients to rediscover the meaning in life.
Can we find meaning in any instance, in any case, a person who faces death imminently?
Certainly, because I'm not tiring of saying life can be meaningful or made meaningful not only by doing a deed, by creating a work, and beyond that, by our experiencing something or by our encountering someone. And to encounter him in his uniqueness means by loving him. But even if need be, whenever we are confronted with an unchangeable fate, whenever we have to face, say, an incurable disease, an inoperable cancer, even then there is the highest meaning potential to realize, to fulfill. Because then, precisely then, we are called upon to bear witness to the unique human potential, which is to transmute, to turn a predicament into an achievement, a human accomplishment, or to turn tragedy into a triumph.
He is full of humor, and he laughs well, and he could understand any person deeply. To the spiritual level, existential level, he can understand in the short while, he can understand. He could make tuning in to me and probably to other patients. This is his power, I think so.
A friend of mine, Barbara, she was a medical doctor, a young medical doctor. She was suffering from a common type of cancer, which was to be treated very well. Unfortunately, in the hospital where she was treated, the General Hospital of Vienna, an accident happened and she got the wrong injection. Instead of getting it in the vein, it was injected into her lumbar region. And so she had to face a progressive paralysis starting from the feet and going up until to her head, which later on led to a coma where she did not wake up from for the next 3 years. After them, she finally died. The most thing she appreciated was that he took his time with his 90 years and went up there. On the way home, when I went home with Professor Franke after the visit of Barbara, he told me the words of John Ruskin, the philosopher John Ruskin, and he said that there is only one honor in life, and that is the honor to help someone, and that is there is only one might in the world, and that is the might or the power to save a person, to save a patient. So this dramatic situation, I could really witness myself that Viktor Frankl was living what he was writing, that he was acting as a man who was a doctor who had a soul.
And now you are a young man, 25 years old, in the doctoral program, the University of Houston, studying psychology. Can you tell us a little bit about what transpired and why your goals changed?
Well, even prior to the injury, I had the mental capacity and the intellectual ability to do things other than physical work, but I did not tap into that. And when I broke my neck, I realized that to have a productive life and to have a meaningful life, I would have to depend upon something other than my physical being, because it was no longer there. And as I've written, when I read his book, I was overcome with a sense of deja vu, because many times, he spoke of reactions and the way he felt and the way he interpreted his experiences in the concentration camps. And repeatedly were the times when I identified personally, I felt the exact same way when I lay in that hospital bed as he did when he was in that concentration camp. And so I wrote him a letter, and much to my amazement, he wrote me back. Very, very applauding and very, very meaningful letter. And therein began a relationship and a correspondence and a professional respect which has continued and mushroomed into today's events.
Jerry was a 18-year-old high school student in Texas who was a very talented baseball pitcher. And out of high school, he threw a baseball fast enough to earn himself a major league tryout. Interestingly enough, he was recruited by the Houston Astros, a local baseball team in Texas, and was sent to the minor league camp. While they were in the camp and they were at night, you know, the players, they were all young kids, would go out and they'd do horse around. So one night they were out and they were swimming in a local aqueduct and they were diving in. They moved over a few feet and Jerry dove in the water, and about 3 inches below the water was a bunker, a cement bunker. He hit his head, broke his neck, and was a quadriplegic for the rest of his life. Jerry read this book, and it so applied to his condition in life, where he was this star coming out of high school, and he thought he was going to make a lot of money and be a professional athlete, which all young Americans aspire to be. And now he was a quadriplegic confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life, who couldn't move his hands very well. He could move from a little bit from here up. He had a little motion, and he learned to type with a mouse stick and things like that. So he read the book, and he wrote a letter to Dr. Frankl. And he said in the letter that, you know, he'd read his book, Man's Search for Meaning, and how it changed his life, and he just wanted to thank him.
He went on to say, you, Dr. Frankl, in the letter that this 19-year-old wrote to Viktor Frankl, you, Dr. Frankl, were in prison. I am in prison. Because of his physical condition, he couldn't feel or control anything from his neck down, but he added one more sentence. You have taught me that I am free.
Could you tell us how logotherapy helped to shape your attitude?
I think that it's important to remember my attitude adoption and the logotherapy that I employed initially was without any knowledge of logotherapy. I had not read any books and I had no acquaintance with it, but intuitively I modified my attitude toward the situation. In one particular line that Dr. Frankl quotes fairly often, I broke my neck, it didn't break me.
If we seem to be idealists and are overestimating, overrating man, and looking at him that high, here above, you know what happens? We promote him to what he really can be. So we have to be idealists in a way, because then we'll wind up as the real realists. And you know who has said this? If we take man as he is, we make him worse. But if we take man as he should be, we make him capable of becoming what he can be. This was not my flight instructor, this was not me, this was Goethe. He said this verbally. And now you will understand why I, in one of my writings, once said, this is the most apt maxim and motto for any psychotherapeutic activity. So if you don't recognize a young man's will to meaning, man's search for meaning, you make him worse, you make him dull, you make him frustrated, you still add and contribute to his frustration. While if you presuppose in this man, even in this so-called criminal or juvenile delinquent or drug abuse and so forth, there must be a what we call spark, a spark of search for meaning. Let's recognize this, let's presuppose it, and then you will elicit it from him, and you will make him become what he in principle is capable of becoming.
Das war ein Mensch, der gebrannt hat und der bestimmte Vorwürfe an seine Therapieformen wirklich fast persönlich genommen hat. Das hat ihn verletzt.
He was so protective of logotherapy that it sometimes got him down, maybe a little bit overprotective, I'm not sure. It stood him well, but also could get him into trouble, because sometimes if you're too quick to defend and you're too quick to rise up in anger against something that you don't like, and maybe there may be one or two times that he did lose his cool.
Einer der Vorwürfe von den Leuten, die ihn näher kannten oder nicht näher kannten, sondern nur irgendwie kannten, war, er wäre eitel. Es gab Verhaltensweisen von ihm, die man absolut so interpretieren konnte, keine Frage. Aber wenn man sich überlegt, wie die Analytiker-Szene damals auf ihn reagiert hat, er war in Amerika ein berühmter Mann und in Österreich nur angefeindet und fast totgeschwiegen, dann stand er hier wahrscheinlich mit dem Rücken zur Wand.
Aber er hat sich schon auch kritisieren lassen, wenn man mit Niveau und mit der Fähigkeit des Zuhörens herangegangen wäre, nicht? Was er, glaube ich, nicht gern gehabt hat, wenn irgendjemand einfach etwas dahergeworfen hat, etwas Kritisches, ohne einen eigenen Gedanken dem entgegenzustellen.
And he was a very private person, a very shy person. For a man who was constantly in the spotlight, he didn't really like that. There were times when he didn't understand what all the fuss is about. He'd be speaking to 2,000 or 3,000 people somewhere, and you could see he's like, what do all these people want with me? And people would walk up to him. I understand one time in Brazil, I think it was Brazil, he told me that when they came out of an elevator, people mobbed him so that they literally ripped Ellie's blouse off. And he couldn't understand that. He couldn't understand. I mean, he knew he had something important to say, and he wanted to say it, but he had no idea the impact it would have. I remember the story about when he wrote Man's Search for Meaning in German the first time, and forgive me, I don't know the German for it, but the translation was from Death Camp to Existentialism. And the first edition is published anonymously because he didn't think that he should get, in essence, fame or fortune for helping people with something that was such an important thing. It wasn't until his friends and family said to him, listen, people want to know who is saying this stuff. They need to know who to write to, who to contact, who to learn from, that he reluctantly agreed to put his name on it. And I think after that, he was sort of always uncomfortable in public because wherever he was, people were walking up to him.
The chief proponent of logotherapy is Viktor Frankl. And his writings in the United States are accessible to all people, both professionals and the public. And that's a problem because academics are a snobbish group. And he was very good at giving analogies, making things understandable. That was his problem. He made things too understandable, made things accessible to everybody. And you don't do that in academics. If everybody can understand it, if you don't have the exclusive key, then you move on.
If someone who is afraid, in simple words, in plain words, that when he leaves his house, say a case of agoraphobia, he might collapse, he might faint, he might get a stroke or a coronary. And if this man who is plagued by this anticipatory fear, and that fear which causes the whole circle formation, if he now does exactly the contrary he had been doing all the time, insofar as he from now on tries, if he for a moment only, the tongue in his cheek, to wish precisely what he had been afraid all along. At the same time, as I put it before, the wind is taken out from the sails of his anxiety. And at the moment that anticipatory anxiety is annihilated, it is not compatible with the wish. If I wish to faint, if I leave my house with the strong wish, now for a change let's faint, for a change yesterday I had 2 strokes, today I would like to have 3 strokes, and so forth. At that moment, all these patients start laughing within themselves in the same way as you right now did. And at that moment, the incompatibility with anxiety comes to the fore, and a distance is put between the symptom, the pathology in themselves, and the selves of those neurotic personalities. And now we understand how come that this capacity of self-detachment, this specifically human capacity, is utilized in the form of paradoxical intention.
Fuimos a pasar el fin de semana, el descanso, a un lugar muy querido y muy especial, un pequeño hotel en la montaña. Y aquí hay un detalle muy interesante. Yo me acuerdo que él llevó un manuscrito y le dijo a su amigo, el encargado o dueño del hotel de montaña, le dijo que escuchara algunas frases que él quería leerle y que le diera su opinión. Y yo me quedé muy sorprendido porque este señor que cuidaba el hotel era un hombre, diríamos, común y corriente. No era de la academia, no era un científico, no era un terapeuta, no era un profesor. Pero Víctor me dijo esto: si este señor puede entender claramente lo que yo he escrito, está correcto. Porque eso es lo que yo quiero, escribir para que la gente comprenda lo que diga en un lenguaje sencillo, claro y preciso.
Er hat auf einem Kongress ein schönes Schlusswort gesprochen. Er hat gesagt, also gute Psychotherapie ist ein Stück Kunst. Ja, es ist also nicht nur ein Wissen, sondern es ist eine Kunst. Und Kunst heißt immer das, was Intuitives da ist, was Inspiratives. Etwas, was sozusagen im Augenblick entstehen muss, kreativ entstehen muss. Ja? Was man nicht vorgefertigt mitbringen kann in die Therapiestunde, sondern was man je Mensch und je Situation neu erfinden muss. Schon auf Grundlagen natürlich, aber irgendwie im Moment anpassen muss an das, was jetzt erforderlich ist. Was er sicher nicht gut konnte, war die pädagogische Kleinarbeit. Ja? Also der Lehrer muss den Kleinkram auch vermitteln können, so Schritt für Schritt und jetzt noch das dazulernen, jetzt noch das. Da braucht man viel Geduld und dann muss man, aber erstens kann niemand alles und zweitens, ich denke, den Kleinkram, das konnten die Schüler übernehmen. Ja? Aber die Schüler hätten den großen Entwurf nicht hingebracht.
Son muchas las experiencias impactantes de Viktor Franke en sus visitas a Buenos Aires, pero una que pinta muy bien la humanidad, la persona, la generosidad y la disponibilidad de Viktor Franke se dio cuando también era habitual que nosotros hiciéramos esto con escasos recursos económicos. Por una circunstancia que no comprendo, porque los pasajes sacados de Europa hacia Buenos Aires eran mucho más económicos que si los sacábamos de acá. Se nos planteó una duda, no nos animábamos, pero la confianza que inspiraba a Víctor me permitió hablarle y decirle: profesor, si usted saca el pasaje en Viena con su tarjeta y nosotros se lo reintegramos cuando viene a Buenos Aires, ¿usted tendría algún inconveniente? De ninguna manera, no tengo ningún inconveniente. Y hago notar que Viktor Franke vino todas las veces a Buenos Aires sin cobrar un solo peso, un solo dólar. Y entonces realmente eso nos benefició muchísimo. Y cuando terminó el Congreso y nosotros le fuimos a pagar, me dijo: Jerónimo, deme su palabra de honor de que ustedes no tuvieron déficit, que ustedes pudieron recuperar el dinero del pasaje, porque si no, el pasaje lo pago yo. Y exigió que le diéramos la palabra de que no habíamos tenido pérdida y que podíamos pagarle el pasaje. Ese es otro detalle de la intimidad de Viktor Franke, que es bueno que se conozca, porque estos detalles de la vida cotidiana tienen que ver con encontrar el sentido en todas las situaciones y en todas las preguntas que nos hace la vida.
Vi a un hombre testimonialmente sencillo. O sea, de esto aprendí de él. Sencillez, claridad, rectitud, mucho trabajo sin duda para poder escribir todo lo que escribió, mucho trabajo, un carácter fuerte, sólido. También en este camino de encontrar sentido no solamente a su vida, sino a cada año de su vida, a cada mes de su vida, a cada día de su vida, a cada hora. Aprendí quizás lo más importante, que es que el gran regalo que nos dieron es tiempo, lo único que nos dieron al nacer y que vamos a tener que entregar al morir. ¿Cómo lo llenamos?
Y dice: pero quiero hacerle un pedido. Dice, y nos pide un órgano. Órgano es como si fuera un piano móvil para tocar, dice, to play a tango of mine, un tango mío, un tango de su creación que no tiene nombre. Y de acuerdo a lo que me dijo Eli la semana pasada, el tango sigue sin tener nombre, siguió sin tener nombre. Bueno, y conseguimos el órgano ese, tocó el tango, fue algo muy lindo. En Río de Janeiro, la traductora empezó a fallar, se levantó y se fue. Se levantó y se fue. Entonces una señora del público sube y dice: yo lo voy a traducir. Voy a poner mi mano atrás y cuando baje el dedo es señal de que no entendí. Al principio estaba bien y de repente empieza a bajar el dedo. Hasta que en un momento determinado Víctor estaba hablando de Auschwitz y ella dice: no puedo traducir porque no entiendo. Entonces Víctor se da vuelta y le dice: no entiende Auschwitz porque usted no estuvo allí.
Cuando se dio la reunión en Porto Alegre en el año 1984, se dio una serie de coincidencias muy significativas, que por ejemplo, cuando lo estábamos esperando en el aeropuerto que llegara el avión de Víctor, entre las personas que lo estaban esperando estaba su cuñada, estaba la hermana de Tilly, su primera esposa, en el aeropuerto. Y pudimos presenciar ese encuentro de ellos. Bueno, fue una cosa muy emotiva realmente, ¿no? También con lo que te conté de la Meyer, esta señora que vivía en Porto Alegre y había sido compañera de barraca en prisión en el campo de Tilly. Esta mujer que era una enfermera de urología y contaba detalles de la convivencia, de cómo era Tilly, de cómo Tilly hablaba de su esposo, del cual estaban separados y no sabían nada el uno del otro. Estoy totalmente seguro de que es cierto que estuvo con Tilly por una frase que Elian Meyer decía que Tilly repetía en relación a Víctor. Tilly decía que Víctor en el campo de concentración iba a sobrevivir porque él tenía hambre de acá y se tocaba la cabeza y no tenía hambre de acá y se tocaba el estómago. Y para los que conocemos toda la trayectoria vital de Víctor, desde niño, desde jovencito, esa avidez del conocimiento, su inteligencia dirigida a conocer más, mejor, explicar y todo lo demás, era claro que Tilly había captado esa dimensión existencial de Víctor, de la búsqueda del conocimiento y casi como una especie como de desprecio por lo físico. En las barracas tenían muy poca higiene y muy poca limpieza y era todo un desastre. Y Ella Mayer decía que Tilly había bebido agua del piso.
Víctor no sabía esta historia.
No, por lo menos yo se la conté a Eli y le pedí que no se lo dijera al profesor.
Meine Damen und Herren, der Nationalsozialismus hat den Rassenwahn aufgebracht. Aber wenn ich Ihnen verraten darf, wie ich darüber denke, dann lautet meine Antwort so: Es gibt eigentlich nur zwei Menschenrassen. Und das ist die Rasse der anständigen Menschen und die Rasse der unanständigen Menschen. Und die Rassentrennung geht quer hindurch durch alle Nationen. Und innerhalb jeder Nation quer hindurch durch alle Parteien und alle Gruppierungen sonstiger Art. Gefahr droht ja nur anderswo. Die anständigen Menschen sind in der Minorität. Die anständigen Menschen waren immer eine Minorität und werden, glaube ich, auch immer eine bleiben. Aber die Gefahr liegt ja anderswo. Die Gefahr liegt dort, wo ein Regime, wo ein politisches System die unanständigen Kerle an die Oberfläche schwemmt und mit anderen Worten dafür sorgt, dass die negative Auslese einer Nation ans Ruder kommt. Das ist die eigentliche Gefahr. Aber davor, meine Damen und Herren, ist von vornherein keine einzige Nation gefeit. Und in diesem Sinne wage ich die Behauptung, dass grundsätzlich jede Nation holocaustfähig ist.
Gustav Baumhackel was a neurologist in Vienna, as Victor was before Hitler. And during the Nazi era, the Hitler era, Baumhackel had joined the Nazi Party, as many citizens did, even without ill intent. So it was in a way the thing to do. And During the war, because Baumhackel was a Nazi Party member, he was in full practice of neurology. After the war, he was unemployed because he had been a member of the Nazi Party. And Victor told me that I should meet Baumhackel and interview him, talk with him, which I did in Baumhackel's home. And he told me, which I knew, but he told me as though I did not know, that he had been a member of the Nazi Party. And Baumhackel actually sobbed briefly when he told me that. And he said, so after the war, I was alone and unemployed, and someone told me that Viktor Frankl, who had survived the concentration camps, was now head of neurology at the Polyclinic, and perhaps I could talk with him to see if there was some kind of work that I could do. And he said, Viktor Frankl gave me a little bit of friendship when I had almost none, and gave me work to do in the Polyclinic. And I will never, ever forget what he did for me at that point in time. Baumhackel, for 50 years, every Christmas, brought flowers to Victor and Ellie at their flat without fail. Decades of this. And he was telling me, I'll never forget what he did for me.
We would, talk about meaning and how to make meaning the pivotal choice in your life. So either it was meaningful or it wasn't meaningful. And if it wasn't meaningful, it wasn't worth considering and it wasn't worth doing. But that even if you were talking to an ex-Nazi, you could find a way of talking to that person to help them understand that what they had done before was not meaningful, and that he had incredible faith in the ability of human beings to do things that were essentially meaningful.
It didn't sit well in many circles, but this is the way that he was, because he was very much future-oriented. He didn't get fixated on the past and wanted to build towards the future.
And he said, anyway, I didn't do anything that special for him. He didn't get paid, but I allowed him to see patients at the Polyclinic. And I said, yes, but for him, this was an unbelievable gift that you gave him. And he said, yes, but it was nothing special. So Victor and I are kind of arguing. And I said, you can't take away from Baumhackel his gratitude to you for what you did for him. He accepted that. And then said again, but why should I not have done this? And I said, but then Baumhackel had said to me, Frankl had just come out of the concentration camps. Victor's defiant. He said, so what? Why should I not have done this for him? And he would not back down from the total logic that he saw in his acceptance of a person. And Victor said, in his heart, he was no Nazi. He joined the party, but in his heart, he was no Nazi. And why should I not help him? It was an extremely moving time, and I came up against a side of Victor that would not budge, absolutely would not budge. And it was his stand against collective guilt, which got him in a lot of trouble, Victor, and he took a lot of criticism for it, but guilt by association was not something that Victor tolerated.
Es war das Klettern für mich immer ein Traum, der aber durch ein väterliches Verbot jahrzehntelang blockiert war, und ich war in diesem Sinn ein folgsamer Sohn. So recht habe ich mich auch nach dem Tod meines Vaters nicht an das Klettern herangewagt. Und Viktor wusste von meiner Sehnsucht und ich erinnere mich, dass wir eines Nachmittags im Schrebergarten gesessen sind, in der Gegend der alten Donau, und er mir sagte, und morgen kommst du mit auf die Rax, da gehen wir jetzt klettern. Und da habe ich mir gedacht, so, wenn sozusagen der Übervater das sagt, das überrollt den Vater, und bin brav am nächsten Tag am Fuße der Breinerwand gestanden und mit ihm den damals 3 Enzian genannten Steig gegangen. Das war meine erste Tour. Und von da an mit Begeisterung dran hängen geblieben.
Er hat ja auf der Bergstation sein Zimmer immer gehabt, sein Dauerzimmer, und da ist er immer, musste er natürlich jetzt 1,5, 2 Stunden über das Plateau zur Breinerwand wandern, dann klettern und wieder zurück. Also das hat schon 6 Stunden gedauert. Und auf den Weg hat er aber immer seine besten Ideen und Inspirationen bekommen, wenn er da, meistens war er ja unter der Woche unterwegs, wo nicht so viele Leute waren. Da hat er also die besten Ideen gehabt, allein mit der Natur. Der Herr Professor hat das Leben eines Bergsteigers hat er immer verglichen mit einem Bauern, der im Sommer das Heu mäht, also das Gras mäht und das Heu in die Scheune einbringt, und wenn es im Winter nichts mehr gibt, dann kann er aus dem Vollen schöpfen, aus der Scheune heraus, also wieder das Heu verfüttern. Und der Bergsteiger erlebt halt, er macht seine Erlebnisse, macht seine Bergtouren. Und wenn er einmal nicht mehr kann, dann hat er die Erinnerungen, die an niemand mehr wegnehmen kann. Und das ist mein Lebensmotto. Also mir ist es fortfahren, irgendwas erleben, das aber auch aufzeichnen, damit man sich dann erinnern kann, sehr wichtig. Damit man dann irgendwann einmal die Scheune voll hat und aus dem Vollen schöpfen kann. Das waren so seine Geschichten, und das war immer irrsinnig klasse.
You have to make an ascent, and then you are doomed to making the descent. Nobody can remain on a peak. The mountaineer also cannot remain on the peak. He has to go down sooner or later to the valley. But what is important is to know that there are peaks, and during these peaks we become aware of the infinite meaningfulness or bliss of being.
Wir haben uns wiederholt getroffen und uns natürlich zu allem Möglichen ausgetauscht, aber in erster Linie war es immer fokussiert auf das Bergsteigen. Und was mich am meisten interessiert hat, wie viel hat ihm das Bergsteigen geholfen, in der schwierigen Zeit im Lager Lebensenergie zu schöpfen. Und er war ganz davon überzeugt, er hat es nur überlebt, weil er eben sich sozusagen im Rückvollzug in dieses Bergsteigen hineingedacht hat und gehofft hat, dass er das noch einmal machen kann. Und da muss man wirklich sagen, dass diese Erinnerungsbilder, die er in sich getragen hat, die ihn als junger Kletterer eben in eine ganz andere Welt geschleudert hatten, als eben die alltägliche Welt, vor allem diese schwierige Welt der 30er, 40er Jahre, dass das so starke Bilder gewesen sein müssen, dass jemand eben, der sicherlich körperlich nicht gerade der stärkste, der durchhaltfähigste war, ihm erlaubt haben, das Schlimmste vom Schlimmen zu überleben.
Ich glaube, dass man beim Bergsteigen lernt, wenn man es ernsthaft angeht, die Angst zu überwinden, drauf zu kommen, dass das noch stärker als alle bösartigen Menschen die Natur ist. Und wenn man eins ist mit der Natur, und ich erinnere mich, wie der Viktor mir erzählt hat, wie er dann gegen Kriegsende schon, wie sie da unter einer Straße eine Brücke graben mussten, nur mit einem Pickel im gefrorenen Erdreich. Da ist ihm das, was er am Berg gelernt hat, zugute gekommen, nämlich dieses Durchhalten, keine Angst vor der Natur zu haben, vor der Kälte, vor dem gefrorenen Erdreich, sondern zu glauben einfach. Das ist was man an den Bergsteigen, ich bin ja keiner, so imponiert ist, dieser Glaube oder diese Hoffnung, ich schaffe den Gipfel.
Come posso dimenticare il tempo che abbiamo trascorso insieme nella Otto House al Monte Rax, e una sera mi fece vedere un libretto dei Salmi, ovviamente senza volersi mettere in mostra, ma solo come testimonianza personale della sua fede e mi disse, ecco, io ogni sera prendo un salmo, lo leggo, sottolineo una frase che mi sembra più significativa e mi fermo a pregare su questo salmo. Per me questa è una delle testimonianze più belle, una religiosità semplice, una religiosità non artificiale, una religiosità che fa riferimento alle origini della fede dei suoi genitori, della sua famiglia e soprattutto un rapporto con Dio al di là delle formalità esterne.
And we had the second bar mitzvah for him. And we arranged, the surprise was that it wasn't a simple bar mitzvah, it was done in the synagogue inside the wall. And of course you have to be well prepared, you have to know the blessings, but he knew it by heart. It was always amazing for me, for someone who was, as you know, so well known in the world and so busy and constantly working and writing, but he remembered whatever he had so many years ago back in his childhood.
Recuerdo que una tarde, durante un paseo en Viena, habíamos decidido ir a visitar su casa original en Czerningasse 6. Fuimos conversando durante el camino, nos detuvimos en la puerta y yo sentí que Víctor dejaba de hablar y como una emoción especial. Y me dijo, ve tú por delante, y él fue detrás de mí. Y entonces se quedó abajo y yo subí solo la escalera hasta el número 25 y tomé las fotografías y me quedé en silencio y él se quedó abajo. Cuando yo bajé, siempre me tomaba del brazo y me dijo, esa ya conoces, esa fue la casa de mis padres, de la que yo salí y nunca más volví a esta casa. Y en ese momento comprendí que era algo muy especial para él, porque sus ojos brillaron, se le llenaron de lágrimas, sabía cuándo estar en silencio, y cuando eran momentos así emotivos que tenían que ver con su historia familiar, dejaba las palabras y eso era todo.
Hat mich zum Abendessen eingeladen im Piaristenkeller. Und der Teufel muss mich geritten haben. Er hat gesagt, haben Sie abschließende Fragen? Sag ich, ja. Ich habe das Gefühl, dass zwei Beziehungen in Ihrem Leben wahnsinnig wichtig sind. Darf ich Sie fragen nach Ihrer Beziehung zu Ihrer Mutter und nach der Beziehung zu Ihrer ersten Frau? Und da hat er mir dann erzählt, wie er zuerst einen Kassiber bekommen hat, dass beide noch am Leben seien. Und er auch rechnen durfte, dass die Frau am Leben ist und er rechnen durfte, dass die Mutter auch am Leben ist, weil damals unter dem Eindruck der Feindspropaganda der Engländer in erster Linie man aufgehört hat, ab einer gewissen Altersgrenze die Leute ins Gas zu schicken. Er wird befreit, ist irgendwo in der Nähe von München und erfährt, die Mutter ist tot, buchstäblich eine der letzten, die ins Gas gegangen ist, geschickt wurde, muss man ja sagen, ist ja nicht gegangen. Und auch die Frau hat es nicht überlebt, von der er gehört hat, sie ist am Leben. Über diese Phase hat er in den Selbstdarstellungen, die im Pongratz Verlag erschienen sind, die Formulierung verwendet, dem Selbstmord nahe. Und an diesem Abend hat er mir erzählt, wie er sich vorgestellt hat, wie der Tod in dieser Gaskammer ist. Er hat bitterlich zu weinen begonnen. Wir sind zum Glück, und der Piaristenkeller ist nicht sehr hell, an der Wand, nicht wirklich in einer Nische, aber in einem Eck gesessen. Und ich konnte eigentlich nichts anderes machen, als mich so setzen, dass man ihn nicht auch noch anstarrt.
At the end of the war, they were death marching the concentration camp inmates and condensing them into various camps, and then they would destroy the old camps so there's no evidence of war crimes. And in the last camp he was in, I think it was Turkheim, I'm not sure, near Dachau, and they had marched him into the camp, but there were different inmates from various camps now. And one morning he gets up and he looks over and someone had smuggled in a set of tefillin, the Jewish prayer boxes that Orthodox Jews use when they do their morning and evening prayers during the week. And he saw this man get up and say the prayers and put on the tefillin. And when he was done, Dr. Franco asked the man if he could borrow his tefillin to put them on. He just had an urge to do this, and he said, I hadn't put on tefillin since my bar mitzvah when I learned how to do it, but I just felt like I wanted to do it. And he asked the man, he had to kind of remind him how to put it on, and he put it on, and he said he was so weak he couldn't remember any Jewish prayers. So the only thing he could remember was the Kaddish, which is a prayer that affirms the importance of life at a time when people die. People commonly refer to it as a prayer for the dead, but it's really a very life-affirming prayer. And it's the only thing, but all Jews know this prayer. And it's the only thing he could remember by heart. So he got up, put on a tefillin that day, and said Kaddish. Well, if you talk about divine intervention, that afternoon the camp was liberated by American soldiers. And he told me that for the rest of his life, he got up every morning, put on tefillin, and said Kaddish.
Victor's concept or his experience of God was on such a grand scale that the barriers between people and the barriers between religious groups were irrelevant to him. He was sorry for them, never wanted to be partisan or denominational or sectarian. And he moved among friends of all sorts of religious backgrounds and of no religious background. It was a level field for Victor and other human beings. Not looking down on people because they were religious, not looking down on people because they were not religious. This acceptance, I think, was connected to a very deep personal faith that he had. In fact, as I recall it, near the end of his life, he was invited by the Rafsanjanis in Iran, where you have a Shia Muslim majority, to come there and give a lecture. Victor was not well enough to make the trip, and so this did not happen. But I could envision him going into a Muslim context and being the same person that he was for all of these other religious groups who found in logotherapy some compatibility with faith and something that Freud could not claim, and most psychologists in that era would have been negative about this. But Victor drew to himself all kinds of people with religious backgrounds.
But we don't leave the level of our scientifically oriented theories. We don't step into the field of theologians. We just remain open, or if you prefer, neutral. As a psychiatrist, I have to see to it, I have even to insist on it, that this theory and practice remain open, so that each psychiatrist, the agnostic as well as the religiously oriented, can use logotherapy for the benefit of his patients, and more than that each patient, the atheistically oriented as well as the believing patient, can benefit from logotherapy, that it be usable in the hands of each psychiatrist and applicable to each patient.
Once he told me about his genius, let's say it, I think he was a genius. He told me, you know, Mr. Mori, I don't think I'm a great thinker, but I always try to think consequently to the end somehow. So he meant that it's not important to think in a very complicated way, but to look forward to some let's say, endless future, so to speak.
What I really learned is staying curious all the time and keeping that curiosity and trying new things all the time, and also I keep dragging people out of self-pity.
Seine größte therapeutische Stärke war seine Glaubwürdigkeit. Die Einheit von dem, was er gelebt hat und gesagt hat. Diese Einheit. Wenn diese Einheit nicht da ist, dann können Sie die schönsten Worte sagen als Psychotherapeut, es kommt nicht an. Aber diese Einheit, also er hat eine absolute Glaubwürdigkeit gehabt, weil er stand für das, was er gesagt hat. Er stand selbst für das. Er hat sich selbst abverlangt, was er anderen abverlangt hat.
His teachings have invaded my heart, not just my intellect. So I have found he changed everything. As a young man in school and becoming a doctor and all, I always say, we were always told, don't get emotionally involved with your patients. And I practiced that. It was very difficult. And then after I read Man's Search for Meaning, I said, hell with this, I'm going to get involved with them.
Logotherapy would have been more successful academically if more of his work was translated, and that academics could see the depths of his understanding.
Because of the European tradition and his own humility, he did not market himself appropriately. When he did Man's Search for Ultimate Meaning, I negotiated the contract with the publisher. What do I know about negotiating a contract with a publisher? And I told him that. He says, 9.9. He says, you do it. Okay. And in that way, even though people all over the world are using logotherapy concepts and techniques, 50, 60, 70 years after he put them out there, he doesn't often get the credit. We now have the positive psychology movement, which is deeply rooted in logotherapy. You know, there's some behavior modification techniques that were introduced, for example, for sexual dysfunction, 40 years later by John Money at Hopkins, and he's talking about paradoxical intention, which Fранке talked about in the 20s, you know, and things like that. But I think that hurt him in some ways in mainstream psychiatry, because he did not get the credit he deserves. Now all these people are doing it, and he would be thrilled that they're doing it, and he could care less about the credit. But I would have liked to seen him get more of the credit.
I now confer upon you, Eleonore Katarina Fранke, the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa, with all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities pertaining thereto.
Ellie had worked in the background for all of these years and had never been recognized for her work. The president at North Park was positive about this, and so we invited Victor and Ellie to come to Chicago, each of them to receive an honorary doctorate. To my surprise, Victor wrote to me that he could not accept a doctorate from North Park because this was the first time Ellie is recognized, and so he would accompany her to Chicago, and she could have the honorary doctorate. He did not want to diminish this honor for Ellie. And so it was the first time after more than 90 trips to the United States where he was lecturing, and she would accompany him in the background. This was the first time he accompanied her to Chicago for her honor. And I think our friendship was somehow cemented, maybe because I recognized Ellie and how important she was in his life and in his work. The audience rose to its feet for a long, long ovation. And during this ovation, we have to remember that Victor is virtually blind here, very little vision left. Nevertheless, completely a surprise for all of us, he got up from his offstage chair, walked straight toward Ellie across the stage, and when she saw him coming, she started to weep. And she told me later, I was determined not to cry, but when she saw him coming, she broke down, and he walked right up to her, took her head in his hands, and kissed her on both cheeks. Later, he told me I was kissing away her tears. And I am sure that there was not a dry eye in that 2,000 people watching this when he came out and recognized her himself as she was being recognized.
I remember Victor saying to me one time how much he loved Ellie, and I remember a remark he made that stays with me where he said, "I never received a glass of water from her that had any moisture on it," which to me meant that she took loving care of him and made sure that she met his needs. And she was wonderful, the way she was able to work with him and type his letters and correspondence. And I don't think many people knew that side of Ellie Frankel.
Ellie did all his typing, and he'd answer a letter and she'd be typing it as he answered it. And every article, every book he wrote, she hand typed on these old typewriters. You know, it wasn't like computers. And I mean, he used to work her all day and all night. And of course, he worked all day and all night.
In my interactions with Ellie, her focus seemed to be abnormal integrity, and an abnormal integrity in which she would just say her truth. And when you say that truth with anesthetic, if you're going to do surgery and you're going to speak the truth in an abnormally direct way, then you have plenty of anesthetic. And she always impressed me very much as having that kind of anesthetic, but being willing to dare to tell her truth no matter what it was.
Ich meine, den größten Teil ins Leben zurückzuführen, musste er schon selber gemacht haben. Aber in diesem Leben bleiben zu können, den Versuch hat er selber gemacht. Bleiben können war die Ellie. Und ich glaube, dass sie beide etwas sehr genau gewusst und gespürt haben. Als er sie kennengelernt hat in der Poliklinik, war sie seine Lebensrettung.
Ein kurzes, aus meiner Sicht unvergessliches und klassisches Bild ist gewesen, als es klar war, dass eine Operation versucht werden wird, also eine aortokoronare Bypass-Operation, die die Durchblutung des Herzens verbessern kann, ja, ging es in Richtung Operationssaal. Und von der normalen Bettenstation. Und da war das Bett, da lag er drinnen. Und da waren natürlich einige Menschen, Ärzte, Professoren, ich war auch dabei. Dann war die Ellie dabei, auch der Franz Wessely meiner Erinnerung nach. Und wir fahren alle ziemlich schnell und zügig in den OP, weil wir durchaus gewusst haben, es ist auch ernst. Und der Viktor liegt im Bett und sagt mit lauter Stimme: Die Situation
entbehrt der Tragik, nicht? Und ist also mit lauter und fröhlicher Stimme. Und ist also in diesem, das war eigentlich das letzte Bild oder eigentlich das letzte Wort, der letzte Satz, den ich von ihm gehört habe, bewusst, denn nach der Operation war er einige Tage auf der Intensivstation, aber immer im Tiefschlaf, und das war sozusagen das letzte Bild und der letzte Satz, den er uns dort geschenkt hat, möchte ich sagen.
Victor's family, those who survived the Holocaust, are buried in Central Cemetery in Vienna, again in a Jewish section of the cemetery, which, by the way, is very poorly kept, and the bombings, the damage from the war remains there. Ellie's family buried in the Catholic cemetery on the other side of the Danube. And I learned in the conversations that when Victor and Ellie died, they would not be buried together. That Victor would be buried in the plot with his family. And by the way, the marker there names the members of his family who were lost in the Holocaust, who were killed in the Holocaust, in memory of them. And Victor was to be buried there with the parts of his family who had already been buried there. And Ellie would be buried in the Catholic cemetery. And I said to them, so, you are born separated by the Danube, separated by religion, separated by class, separated by education. Ellie was a home economics major in high school. Victor, MD, PhD, honorary doctorates. So much separating the two of them. And then I said, at the end, you're separated again. And Victor says, I don't give a damn where we are buried. No one can take away from Ellie and me the life that we have spent together and all that we have done together. This we keep, and I couldn't give a damn about where I'm buried, or we can't be separated. Again, that defiant attitude, and Ellie is agreeing. Sitting there nodding, yeah, this is right. Where we're buried doesn't matter. What matters is the life that we've lived together.